I'm a person, I'm a complex being. I am human, I am spirit, I am more than I seem. I'm a diamond
On April
multifaceted.
27th, 1994, the world held its breath. The first democratic election in South Africa ended apartheid. One of the most inhumane systems of racial oppression was dismantled after decades of protest and resistance. For 46 years, apartheid had deprived the majority of the non-white population of major civic and social rights. Under the leadership of the Afrikaner-led National Party, major human rights violations were executed. Horrendous pain and humiliation was inflicted upon human beings who were classified as blacks, colored, or Indian. Non-white political representation was abolished. People were deprived of their citizenship. All major areas of daily living had been segregated: schools, healthcare, and beaches. Interracial marriages were prohibited. Through systematic forced removals, about 3.5 million non-white South Africans lost their homes and were forced into segregated townships. Neighborhoods and friendships were torn apart. Men and women who resisted apartheid became enemies of the state. They were tortured, incarcerated, and killed. How can a society heal from such atrocities? How can communities attend to the social, economic, and spiritual wounds that apartheid had created? What does it mean to strive for new ways of communal living when history still bleeds through? How can individuals deal with disastrous memories in healing ways? From its outset, the newly elected government under the leadership of Nelson Mandela saw the need to forcefully address these questions and to engender processes of healing on various levels. Between 1996 and 1998, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, became a major platform that offered a space for victims to share their stories. Even perpetrators of politically motivated violence got a chance to acknowledge their misdeeds and responsibility, and to receive amnesty after full disclosure of their offences. The TRC focused on gross human rights violations, such as torture and killings. It left untouched, however, the enormous affliction and humiliation that was caused by systematic degradation and exploitation in the workplace, by inferior education, police violence, and poverty.
From 93 until 98, I was chaplain to what was then called the Trauma Center for Victims of Violence and Torture. And it was in the period, the beginning of the democratic era in South Africa. It was a time when it was being decided that we would have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission as one vehicle for South Africa to deal with its past and provide a bridge from the old order of apartheid into a democratic society. And before the commission even started, I asked the question, how many people will come to this commission? The answer was 23,000 people came, which we later found out. But my concern was, well, what about the rest of the country? Because my contention was that all South Africans had a story to tell. All South Africans had been affected by apartheid. All South Africans carried stuff in us because of the past the nation had traveled. But it was not true that all South Africans were pathological. It was not true that all South Africans needed a clinical intervention. So we needed to create spaces where South Africans of all sides of the struggle could tell each other their stories. and deal with the past of the nation psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. And that led us to create a methodology that we called a Healing of the Memories workshop. And so that began while I was part of the Trauma Center and later gave birth to the Institute for Healing of Memories. But it also grew on the one hand out of the reflection of myself and others on the past of the nation, but it also grew as a reflection, as I reflected on what had helped me to heal, because I had received a letter bomb in April of 1990. And so obviously I'd also traveled my own journey of healing. And so that personal reflection, as well as the national reflection, were, if you like, the foundations of what became the Institute for Healing of Memories.
Father Michael Lapsley had been active in the anti-apartheid movement and also in the African National Congress, ANC. In 1990, when negotiations between the National Party and the ANC had already begun, he became a victim of a letter bomb that almost killed him. He survived, yet the blast destroyed both of his hands and one of his eyes. Despite this horrendous act of violence, Father Lapsley refused to perceive himself as a defeated victim of apartheid. Scarred by this experience, he gradually transformed his purpose in life towards a ministry of healing. He used his own journey of pain as a resource to help South Africans to confront and embrace their own life stories. Through the Healing of Memories workshops, Father Lapsley's own life was transformed from freedom fighter to wounded healer. This transformation became foundational for the philosophy and the mission of the Institute, which opened its doors in 1998. The Institute for Healing of Memories believes that all South Africans have been messed up by apartheid. Henceforth, the political and spiritual task at hand is to restore a sense of common humanity that had been so profoundly damaged by the distorted political logic that constructed racialized groups of people by setting them apart and by creating divisive hierarchies between them. Accordingly, one of the big challenges the Institute took on since then has been to foster sensibilities towards the vision of a common humanity. In all areas of the work, this vision of interconnectedness is prominent. It is clear, however, that such a humanist approach can only be life-giving when the history of apartheid is faced simultaneously on a personal and communal level.
So, the Institute, the first principle, I think, or important philosophy that the work of the Institute is pinned on is that we are all spiritual beings and are therefore of infinite worth. And I think just that prime identity of our common humanity. And because we believe that we're spiritual beings, it means that the spirit can grow and it can also be damaged. And that's important in terms of the work that we do, because we talk about the physical and the psychological damage and pain, but we don't always talk about the spiritual damage, and so it brings in that dimension when we talk about the spiritual being. The other important principle is that we can be both victim and victimizers. That the complexity of us being human and being spiritual beings is that sometimes in different times of our lives, we can be victims of situations, and at other times in our lives, we can be victimizers. And most of the time, we're both at the same time. We can be bullied at home by our sisters, our brothers, and we're a victim, and we go to school, and then we bully somebody else. And it can all happen in the space of a day. So we are all of that, and so it's understanding the complexity of what it means to be human, but also the impact that the actions that is done to us has on our own behavior and how we then see ourselves. Then the other important, I think, one is that we we all need to take responsibility for what has happened in our history and redeem it and take it forward. Yes, we didn't agree to that history, but history has happened. It is there. It sits in our lap. And so we all need to take responsibility for what we do with that history and how we take it forward. And linked to that is then facing history and facing ourselves, is to say, what has been our role in that history, you know? And in that then facing who we are as a person.
The principles of the Institute are put into practice in 3 areas: the Healing of Memories workshops, the community dialogues, and a youth program called Restoring Humanity. At the core of the workshops resides a practice of autobiographical storytelling. Participants are invited to share significant moments of their lives in which the intersection between their own personal story and the story of the nation comes to the fore. The listeners don't comment or judge. They try to be present as much as possible to what the other person is saying. This way, people become witnesses to each other's experiences. Oftentimes, the shared stories touch upon deep feelings of abandonment, anger, and bitterness, yet also shame and guilt. Healing of memories is understood as an open-ended process in which poisoning emotions are released and responsibility for one's own actions and the deeds of others are acknowledged. It fosters an imagination that is realistic about the wounds and the scars that will remain. Simultaneously, it is a resourceful practice since it encourages people to discover and strengthen the potential for transformation in their own lives. The process begins with watching a film or concentrating on images that might trigger one's own memories. This way, people enter into a shared space. Since the groups consists frequently of different generations and people might come from different countries, their connections to the apartheid years differ. People ponder tough questions that seek to explore the effects of the country's past on one's own life. What did you do? What was done to you? What did you fail to do? The history of apartheid and the unresolved legacy of violence come up in all kinds of life issues. Over the years, the range of topics expanded. Participants deal with issues around HIV, AIDS, domestic violence, or xenophobia. These are personal and highly political at the same time. The workshops evoke memories that are felt deeply and still have an impact on people's life in the present. Exercises are employed, such as drawing and creating rituals that tap into the more unconscious dimensions of memory. The ritual that is created in the last segment of the workshop is especially dedicated to the release of negative emotions. It gives room for the participant to create hopeful images and symbols. Workshop facilitators describe the impact of the workshops on their own lives.
And after that healing of memories, I started dealing with self. I started dealing with self, saying, for how long am I going to cry? Am I going to sit here and become a victim? I said, I'm not going to be a victim. That's the time I took up my courage to say, I'm going to stand up and do something about it. Then I started studying about what does the virus does in one's body. And nurses and doctors, I could actually hear them speak, we don't think she will make it. I could hear them saying, we don't think she could make it. Then I told myself, I said, I will make it.
Truthfully, on my side, I always had the mindset of thinking that Because I grew up here in South Africa and I grew up in Cape Town, I always thought in my mind that only South Africans go through painful experiences, and we're the only one in the world that has experienced greater pain, you know. But when I went overseas, because the stereotype was that Europe or other countries are much better off than South Africa. But when I was able to have a chance to able to go there, and I found out myself that the same situations that I went through are the same things that I've experienced in my own life, in my family life, in my social life. Also, other people there have experienced them. They've experienced disappointment. They've gone under a period of depression.